Alright, for our first screencast this week, let's look at how we can read data from files in C++. So what I've done is I've created a new project in Visual Studio called File Read. I've made it an empty project and I've added a C++ file called fileread.cpp to my project. And I'm going to create the usual skeleton that we use. So give the program name at the top and then a description of what it does. So reads data points from a file, okay, and stores them in arrays. I know I'm going to need IO stream because I want to be able to write to the screen an error message at least if an error happens, or the values as I read them in to check that it's working properly. And because I'm going to open a file, I also need to include fstream, which is the package that includes the functions and objects for opening and reading files. I'm going to use the namespace standard like we normally do, and then I'm going to start my main program. I'm going to give it the return value 0 and close the curly bracket. Okay, so there's my skeleton program. Now the file that I'm going to read in is not a very complicated one. It's called XY data, and it looks like this. So open it with WordPad. Okay, so it's a very simple input file. It's 2 columns of numbers separated. The columns are separated by white space. Okay, so this is the easiest kind of file to read in C++. If you have columns of data separated by white space, it's very easy to read that. For Visual Studio's point of view, the file that you're going to read needs to be in the project directory. So you have to copy this file that you're trying to read, XY data, into the appropriate place. So if you right click on File Read, the project, and then you click Open Folder in Windows Explorer, this is the directory you need to paste that file into. So you go and find your file, copy it, Control C, and then paste it into the project directory. Okay, so now when you compile and run your program, it will know where to look for the file to read. Okay, so let's open the file. So we create a ifstream object. Let's call it my file, and you just give it the file name in as a string, xydata.txt. Okay, so that will try to open the file called xy_data.txt. You can check if it worked by using one of the member functions of ifstream, and that's called isOpen. So that function call will return true if the file is open, and if we want to, we could write out a message to say successfully opened the file. Let's say, oops. Okay. If it returns false, then it didn't work. So we should output a message saying unable to open the file. Okay. So if we get in this bit, then we know the file's open and ready for reading. So we want to keep reading lines until the end of the file. So while we're not at the end of the file, so that's the function called EOF, the member function of ifstream. So we call myfile.eof. That returns true if the file still has lines in. So while the file still has lines in, read a line. So this is where you tell the program to read in from that ifstream, and you tell it where to put the values it reads in. Okay, so we're going to put them into two arrays called x and y. Okay, and the only thing that I need to do now is to declare the variables. Declare variables. So I'm going to use an integer I, which starts off at 0, and I'm going to store the values I've read in two arrays of doubles, x and y, and I know from knowing what my file looks like that there are 5 rows, so I can make my arrays have 5 elements. Okay, and then all I need to do to make this work now is add 1 to I every time I read a line. Okay, so every time it reads a line, I will start off as 0, so the 0th element, or the first element of x gets set, and then the first element of y, and then the counter I is incremented. So we could write a comment there as well. Okay, so let's build that. Press F7. Succeeded, that's good. So now let's run it. Control F5. It says successfully opened the file, and then it will have read in the numbers. Okay, but you can't see that because we didn't tell it to output anything. Let's see what happens if you say change the file name to a file that you know doesn't exist. So it will still build because there's nothing wrong. It doesn't check that while it's compiling. But when you run now, it says unable to open the file. That's because it couldn't find that file. Okay, so let's put it back to how it should be. And now what we can do is we could, after we've read it in, so after we get to here, we could output the data points to check they were read in correctly. So this is going to be a loop over the elements of the arrays that we use to store the numbers, and then I'm going to print formatted output. This is very like the format, the printf function in MATLAB. So it's printf and then the format specifier. So this is exactly the same syntax as it was in MATLAB. X equals a floating point number 5 characters wide, 2 characters after the decimal place. Y equals, we just use the same thing, and a new line. Then what you want to substitute in the first bit, 5.2f bit, and what you want, it's an I, isn't it? What you want to substitute into the second bit. Okay. So now we should be able to see the data points that we've read in after we've read them in. Okay, so if you compare back with the file xy_data, you see that those are the right numbers. So if in this case now, if the file was not able to be opened, then it would still get to this bit where it outputs the data points. So what we really need to do is, if the file could not be opened, we write the warning unable to open the file, but then we terminate the program. So you do that with exit 1. So now if the file name is wrong, or the file doesn't exist, or there's a problem opening the file, the program will exit, so it will never see this bit where it outputs the data points. So that's just makes it a bit more robust, a bit more correct. Okay, so this example showed you how to open a file, how to check if the file is successfully open, how to read a line from the file, how to put the read in column numbers into the appropriate arrays, and of course you can have as many of these assignments as you have columns in your file. Showed you how to exit the program if something goes wrong, and showed you how to print formatted output to the screen of the data points you've read in to make sure they were read correctly.